Okay, so I'm just going to give you some background now, some theory, what's happening so far. I'll try and get through this as quick as I can. There is quite a lot of information here. Principally, that's why I sent out a lot of the information yesterday. I'm not going to go into massive detail as well, because it might be an idea for you guys to actually think about it as well and research into it so you can get bedded in. So, some of the key moments. It's not the only moments, but some of the key moments. Now, in 1993, there was a support and strand fund set up by the Department for Education, which was called the Disabled Students Allowance. All right, and it was quite big. It was quite a lot. Gave a lot of support. So, disabled students, especially, felt a bit more supported. We had the Discrimination Act in 1995, and then, more importantly, what's eclipsed all of that is the Equality Act in 2010, which is the overarching, the biggest thing that we here in the UK run by now. And it incorporates a lot of the EU equality trademarks as well. That's what it tries to do. It's a big document, and that act is there to prevent discrimination from all what we call protected characteristics. So in April 2014, it was suddenly announced by our government that the money for disabled students allowance especially was being majorly reduced. And those adjustments, those amendments, those reductions happens last September. So a lot of disabled students who you have now in your classes will be getting much less support than they used to. And the government's idea is that, obviously, it's not just for disabled, it's for all. Okay, can we move on, Andy? Yeah. Okay, so the drive. And this is where, again, what the government is saying and what, obviously, a lot of universities are trying to do. So there's a lot of recruitment going on for international students now, and we think about Brexit and all of this as, as part of the package. We think about all the work that's been going into the BME attainment gaps. Obviously, the reduction in the DSA. Why is my curriculum white? And you're seeing all these liberation campaigns and groups starting up now, such as the LGBT. And students are wanting more voice. They are wanting more input. And there's lots of other widened participation activities and initiatives going on. So all of these things are rolled into one big element of inclusiveness. Okay, let's move on. So the benefits. We've got the benefits, yeah? Yeah. So in the government's point of view and in the philosophy point of view, there are four main benefits for inclusive education, inclusive practices, just inclusiveness in general. Not the only reasons, not the only benefits, but these are principal driving forces. So it's the external scrutiny that we're getting, the Equality Act, which also includes the Disabled Students Allowance, the cost saving, some might say cost cutting, and then the representation, how it looks. So we move on and we'll talk about the external scrutiny. So essentially it means how the university can look and how it can actually differentiate its activities to actually incorporate and support and make the students feel better and actually more included. And it's meant to be how the institute looks as though it's supporting all these characteristics. Yeah, and if a university can look good at that, then obviously that will get a lot of praise. And people will look, general public will look, funding may depend on how a university, deals with some of these diverse backgrounds. So move on. So the Equality Act, this is the legal, this is where it gets slightly grey, because obviously if a university, any university or public sector institute is not abiding by the Equality Act, then there could be legal implications. There could be financial implications. So we've got to be slightly careful about the Equality Act, and we've got to take that into account. And the common phrase is we've got to make sure that we are providing reasonable adjustments for all of our students. Yep, next slide. So which is the cost saving. And the basic idea of cost saving is if a student is embedded into your practice, then you will not have to make any additional adjustment to support that student because he's already been catered for. If he's been catered for, no extra costs, no extra resources need to be done. So therefore, you are actually cost saving. Okay, let's move on. And then the last one is the reputation. And it's the bragging rights, if you like. But, you know, also you can actually start thinking about in other ways how a university can be measured in what it's doing to cater for its students. So if we think about the Teaching Excellence Framework, we've got our Vision 2029 going on at the minute. We will be identified and actually marked if we are not making sure we're inclusive, which is obviously important because students won't come here if we're not doing it and we're not doing it right. Let's move on. So inclusive teaching or inclusive practices in any way, shape or form shouldn't be just a token gesture. It needs to be meaningful, it needs to be relevant, and we'll come back to this word accessible. And what you need to make sure is that you're celebrating that diversity. And I think we had one comment at the back as well about the potential and the identity of the students. We need to make sure that we're promoting that and actually facilitating that. And that's one of the driving forces for inclusive education. Let's move on. So the risk. Obviously, there's quite a few risks if we're not doing it. There is the legal problem, implications, if we're not. You know, if we are not providing reasonable adjustments, we are not providing means that students can interact, you know, be part of the community, then there are issues. And that's not just in the legal sense, we've got to think about the moral sense and the ethics sense. And at the end of the day, if you are acting in an inclusive manner, you're actually acting in a good manner in any case. So there's a slogan, inclusive practices equals good practices. Let's move on. So there's been a lot written about inclusive education. It's not a new concept, but as Ambrose is telling us here, essentially what we need to do, we need to be smart. We need to be thinking about how we go about this. To do it, you need to be creative. You need to be, you know, take things on board. Don't be scared. It's not a deficit point of view where we're from. It's actually a developmental stage. And if we can develop ourselves and be a, you know, supportive measure, that positivity will be spread. So it's about being smart. Okay, let's move on. So the endeavour. So how do we go about doing this? Essentially what we need to do, we need to support staff. And that is support in a positive sense point of view. So obviously this today is going to help and support and start the process. We need leadership, promotion. You know, we need the word to be spread around. We need to use technology as a big driver because that walks in accessibility and usability, which we've already discussed. And technology is one of the easiest things that we can use. And we need to have a renewed focus. We need to have students pitching in and actually saying, we want this, and we need to listen to them. And we need to have them as you know, support and mechanisms to actually drive this forward. Okay, let's move forward. So the barriers. These are not exhaustive, but barriers to getting all this in place, we need leadership. That's from the top, from faculty level, departmental level. So everybody needs to get on board. There's lots of other competing priorities that we've got in our life. You know, life happens and all this, you know, can be all too much at one stage. We need to realize that there's a culture change that's needed. You know, people do need to start rethinking about what we're doing and how we're doing it and why we're doing it. And we need to not just do this in the classroom. As I've said many times, we need to do this amongst our personal lives, amongst our professional services. It's in other places, not just in the classroom. Because that will spill over into the classroom if we're doing it in other ways. We need to get initial resources, all the training. We need to get all the information gathered together. There's lots of little pockets of information around, but nobody's collating at the moment. So that is an endeavour that's going across the sector. And the other thing is time, right? It's going to take a long time to do all of this. We can do some quick fixes, but longitudes, I was at a conference last year where it said that it's probably not going to be until 2025 or 2030 that we're going to get a lot more inclusive practitioners on board. So you need to realise, accept small steps, little ways, all right? It's not going to happen overnight, but if you can make small differences, they will accumulate. Okay, let's move on. So what are quick things we can do? And I mean, these are very quick actions we can do straight away. And it's surprising how effective these can be. So just putting everything up on our virtual learning environments. That's not just for teaching, that's for our colleagues, make sure everything's accessible, centrally based. And Andy's going to go through the accessibility part of checking all your resources afterwards. And there's some really good stuff there. We can think about our reading lists or other documents that we're using within our departments. We can facilitate recording of lectures. It's a big hot topic. We are lecture capturing this at the moment, so we will make that free afterwards. And if you can, pre-select who you're working with, the students, celebrate that diversity, get them in, in discussion and debate, and make sure that the way you're teaching or the way you're interacting with people is different, varied. Use different things. Be creative. Be, versatile, and don't be afraid of that. We did a massive survey amongst teaching staff, especially when I first came around, to see what is going on. Because there was loads of stuff going on, but nobody was communicating with each other. We looked at a lot of the student comments, and there was lots of different data that we could actually draw on. And this is one thing that I think that, not just in King's, but across the sector, we're not analysing the data. So we had a look at all the data, and we found some interesting things, so we moved on. So the barriers, if you like, I'm not particularly keen on the word barriers, or difficulties, challenges that students didn't like, was they didn't have their identity recognised or celebrated. This idea of exclusion. Some of them were excluded completely. There was a lack of unfamiliar terms, especially when you go discipline-specific stuff. There was a very rigid teaching style. So, people just went in, lectured, went out, and you didn't see them anymore. There wasn't a diverse way of teaching, learning, speaking, acting. It was all very formal. And people weren't asked about their personal experiences or life experiences or their knowledge. And again, hopefully that we're drawing on your guys' knowledge to actually help us as well, because what we should be doing as facilitators or practitioners is stand on the front and say, where we want to know about you as well. And if we don't know about something, we need to signpost to other places, other services, other support areas. And that's one thing that students felt people couldn't do. So on the flip side of that, if we move on to the barriers expressed by the teaching staff, a lot of them said they didn't understand what inclusive education was about. So what is it? 78%, which I find an amazingly high figure, said they weren't confident that they had the knowledge or the resources or couldn't do what they wanted to do, especially in regards to supporting students, disabled students now who won't have necessarily the amount of support that they used to in the future. Very scared, some of them. A lot of them said they were time poor, support, don't have time, don't have the resources, teaching large groups, if you're teaching a lecture of 400 people, how can you differentiate and incorporate inclusive education? And it's balancing responsibilities. And this is where the idea of small steps comes in to help. And then we've got to think about program-specific discipline stuff, which is hard. Okay, let's move on. So what we're doing here at King's. So I and King's Learning Institute, we're developing teams, conversations with lots of people. We're talking with other departments because we need that communication to start. Because I think that's one of the things that is hindering a lot of us. Communication, talking to us, what we're doing, how we're doing it. We've developed an internal website now, a portal, where a lot of our resources can be put on place. Hopefully Andy will show you that later on. Lots and lots of good resources where you can tap into, get ideas, get advice, etc. And King's Learning Institute actually has another education strand going across the institute, which is called Changing Classrooms. So we're aligning ourselves into that. And we're also got inclusive education practices embedded into the TEF and also the vision of 2029. And then we're starting these packages, DCP packages, as an example today. So hopefully we can get this word spread out and get the word known.